We're going to start with Nicola Pisano, who trains under the rule of Frederick II, King of Sicily. And in 1250 he moves to Pisa. At the time, this is a center for lucrative commissions as it was at the height of its political and economic power, primarily as a naval force capable of incredible trade throughout the Mediterranean. And Nicola will specialize in relief sculpture and the ornamentation for large pulpits. This would be his first. And a pulpit is where the priest would stand up here at the top, while giving his sermon so that the entire congregation could see what he's doing. And you'll notice this pulpit is very sculptural. We have a series of lions, a series of columns, but it's really the panels that we want to look at, and one specifically. I want to look at the Annunciation, Nativity, and Adoration of the shepherds. The focus of the work here is on a reclining figure of Mary, whose draperies are reminiscent of lid figures on Roman and Etruscan sarcophagi. Very, very common forms that are being dug up at the time. So let's look at this piece. What we have is a series of narratives, or a collection of narratives for one story. After all, when you look at a story, it's very difficult sometimes to pick out the one image that would depict the whole thing. And so what we're going to see is, for example, here, the two figures around the arrow, we have Gabriel and we have Mary, and this is known as the Annunciation. Gabriel is appearing to Mary and telling her she will have the child of God, or Jesus. Next, as we move over to the right, we have an angel appearing to the shepherds, telling them that a new king is born. In the center, the largest figure is Mary, and here we see the baby Jesus, and arguably not a very realistic depiction of a mother having just given birth, because she's turned away from the child. She seems more interested in the viewer than she is the child, something that's not necessarily all that naturalistic. But you'll notice she's much larger. This is known as hierarchy of scale. The larger the figure in any image, the more important that figure is to the image. After all, this is all surrounding Mary and the Nativity, so she is central to the narrative. Then we have the shepherds bearing gifts, which they are offering to Jesus. So here's our shepherd. We know he's a shepherd. There's his flock behind him. Here's Jesus. Mary is attempting to bathe Jesus. It doesn't appear to be a very successful attempt at bathing him, seeing as how his feet are up on the bowl, but you get the idea. And Joseph is just sitting in the background, kind of watching what's going on. Now, from a technical perspective, the carvings are very good, but from a narrative perspective, it lacks something. It lacks emotion. For example, when Mary hears that she's about to give birth to the Son of God, her reaction is kind of just to point at herself, but she has this very stoic look of indifference. The same after she's given birth. She's not smiling, she's not paying attention to the child, she's paying more attention to us. And again, when she's bathing the child, we see a similar reaction. There's no emotion, there's nothing to the story. The images are good, but it could be better. So, this brings us to Giovanni Pisano, who is Nicola Pisano's son. And he's also a very well-known artist, having trained under his father, who will be very sought after in his time. And he creates a pulpit, shockingly, in Pistola. And here, again, we have this very sculptural pulpit with a series of panels surrounding it. We're actually going to look at one of those panels, which shockingly is the Annunciation, Nativity, and Adoration of the Shepherds, because, well, why not? But it creates an interesting comparison. So here he features a nativity scene. However, it's in striking contrast to his father's work. The image, in this case, replaces the stiff, stoic feeling of his father's with a dynamic image full of movement and depth. The swift turning and sinuous draperies, slender figures, and emotion of the scene are features not found in Nicola's interpretation. So as we look at it, you'll notice we have, again, the Annunciation in the same position, the angel appearing to Mary, and Mary kind of being taken aback. There's not a lot of emotion there. There's not a lot of facial expression, but the body language tells us that she's taken aback. She's surprised, which makes sense given what she's being told. We have the angels, again, appearing to the shepherds. Here we see an angel reaching down to the shepherds. In the center, the most important figure, although you'll notice in exactly the same scale, is Mary and Jesus, Mary having just given birth. And you'll notice, for example, Mary has breasts, which are a symbol of motherhood rather than a symbol of sexuality at this time. And she's reaching over, taking care of the child, something a mother would naturally do given the circumstance. Here we have the shepherd again appearing before Jesus, but instead of fighting Jesus into the bath, Jesus seems none too happy, but you'll notice Mary's checking the temperature of the bath water. Again, something that a mom would naturally do. And Joseph is sitting in the background going, why am I even here? Something that a father might naturally, okay, maybe not, but we get a sense of emotion. In this case, all of the emotion is through body language, body position, and composition. But it leads to the obvious question, what happens when we compare the Father's work to the Son's? And what you start to see is a massive evolution. Here we have hierarchy of scale, a massive Mary, who's really not a motherly figure. She's more a sculpture that happens to be sitting there staring at the viewer. Here, Mary's doing something much more natural, reaching out to the baby Jesus. When we look at the Annunciation, you see the difference in terms of expression. And again, the bath scene, you see that naturalism of Giovanni's work over Nicola's. You also, when you see these together, see those sinuous draperies and slender figures. These figures are kind of chunky. They're built as if they're pieces, simply put together. But when you get to the Son's work, to Giovanni's work, the figures seem to flow together. They make sense. Just look at how the body form moves under the drapery in all of these images. We have a sense of emotion that is completely missing from Nicola's work, which appears in Giovanni's.